Hey everybody, Alex the Critic here, and it's once again time to rip into a stupid video that I found on the internet. This is Cancerous Commentaries. Longtime viewers of my channel might remember that I've said that my two primary influences when it comes to the way I produce my content are the mysterious Mr. Enter and the amazing Atheist. While that is true, I was also inspired by a third group of people, the Channel Awesome reviewers.
Channel Awesome is an online entertainment company that specializes in video production. The company was created by Mike Mashad, Mike Ellis, and Bhargav Janamraju in April of 2008, and is most well known for producing the Nostalgia Critic web series. If you somehow don't know what Nostalgia Critic is, it's a web series about a loud, abrasive, and opinionated movie reviewer named, well, the Nostalgia Critic, who's played by Doug Walker. Doug Walker's older work on Nostalgia Critic was a huge influence on me. I loved how passionate he was in his rants about bad movies, as well as how funny a lot of his jokes were and still are.
Yes, apparently there's a state home for the ugly, where men literally walk around with nets and capture ugly people the same way dog catchers capture puppies for the pound.
You shouldn't wear a mask unless it's Halloween, kid.
No hard feelings, eh, kid?
What world? Reality? Drugs? Where would you even get funding for that? I mean, you're telling me there's an actual state home for the ugly, and yet Joan Rivers, Michael Moore, and Carrot Top are allowed to roam free? What kind of sick, crazy world is this? So, Captain Planet, what other issues are you gonna talk to grade school kids about?
AIDS? You tested positive for the HIV virus.
Stop! Cease! Desist! Get out of there before it's too late!
The name is Pugsy. What's yours?
I'm Tom.
I'm Jerry.
What the hell? Did they just talk? Did Tom and Jerry, one of the most famous silent duos of all time, just speak to each other? No. It's gotta be a mistake. I gotta be hearing things. I'm gonna just go ahead and eat my customary 3-pound watermelon and drink my traditional pitcher of sangria both at the same time while I confirm how wrong I was about this ridiculous misunderstanding.
What do you think I am, a dummy?
You said it.
Holy crap! They talked! They actually talked!
I especially loved how he created all of these weird side characters that he would film equally funny skits with, some of which were parodies of characters from the bad movies he previously reviewed.
Come on, Gary Oldman, you're a great actor! Why were you choosing these obvious villain roles at the time? I mean, there's just nothing subtle about them.
Did somebody question my subtle acting?
Oh, come on, Dr. Smith, you're about as subtle as a fucking train wreck. On a boat.
Oh, come now. There are several differences between me and that Rupert fellow. For example, I want to seize power and control through a legion of spiders.
But that Rupert guy wants to seize power and control too.
But not with spiders.
Oh, for God's sake. You know what you need to do, Dr. Smith?
Does it involve spiders?
No, you need to be diabolical. Actually fool people into thinking you're a kind, gentle, caring person. You think you can do that?
I think the boat sort of sailed on that one.
Alright, well don't bother me anymore. I got a review to do.
Wait, there's one more important thing. It's imperative that you must know.
What? What?
Spiders. You're doomed. Doomed!
Of course, the Nostalgia Critic was not the only review-based web series that Channel Awesome produced. At its height, more than 30 people contributed content of their own to the site, although the only ones whose shows I actually enjoyed and took any inspiration from were Atop the Fourth Wall, a web series starring Louis Lovehog as Linkara, an angry comic book reviewer, The Spoonie Experiment, a web series starring Noah Antweiler as Spoonie, an angry video game reviewer, and The Angry Joe Show, a web series starring Joe Vargas as Angry Joe, yet another angry video game reviewer.
If it wasn't for all of these guys and their unique brand of media reviews, my content would look very different from the way it does today. Now, some of you may be wondering, alright Alex, what the hell does any of that have to do with this commentary? The answer to that question is simple. Today, I'm going to be responding to a video that aims to take the nostalgia critic down a peg by debunking his review of a film called Rango. The video in question was uploaded by a commentator, artist, and media reviewer named Magma Paint and is titled Nostalgia Critic Doesn't Understand Rango. As you could probably glean from the title of my video, I didn't take too kindly to what she had to say about Doug. Before I get into the video, however, let me briefly explain what Rango is and give my overall thoughts on it.
Rango is a children's animated adventure film directed by Gore Verbinski, produced by Nickelodeon Movies, and released on March 4th, 2011. The film, which centers on a lonely, depressed chameleon named Rango, stumbling into a Wild West-style town and becoming its sheriff after a series of misunderstandings, serves as an affectionate parody of Western movies. Upon release, it gained moderate success at the box office, and was praised by both critics and audiences for its gorgeous animation, engaging story, and well-rounded characters.
As for what I think about the movie, I agree with the majority opinion. Rango is a well-written film that both adults and children can enjoy, and I even consider it one of my favorite animated films of all time, which means a lot coming from me because I fucking hate westerns. As for what I felt about Nostalgia Critic's review of Rango, I thought it was mostly harmless, although I did disagree with a few of the things he said in it. One last note I want to make before I get started is that I am not here to say that Doug Walker is an angel who has never done anything wrong before. I am merely here to debunk what I feel is a very poor refutation of one of Doug's reviews. With all of that out of the way, let's get into Magma Paint's video.
Back in the day, even if I don't like the depictions shown in them, the thumbnails were actual drawings by an artist who goes by the screen name Marobot. They lend themselves to Doug insisting on doing over-the-top, goofy expressions better than just mugging the camera because what works in a drawing doesn't always pan out in reality. The most I could find as to why Marobot no longer does the thumbnail art is that he asked for a raise and the Walkers and Mike Machad cut off all contact with him.
If you're going to make a claim like this, then I expect you to provide some actual evidence for it. Some random dude on Twitter claiming that this happened is not evidence of anything. Especially when they clarify in a follow-up tweet that this allegation came from some other random people in the Channel Awesome fan forums, and that the only reason why it's believable is because of some of the other allegations that have been made against Channel Awesome's management. Otherwise, I could sit here and just accuse you of anything random, and my claim would have just as much weight behind it.
Allegedly, he was only making $10 per thumbnail, and considering the quality and skill of Marobot's work, that's criminally underpriced.
It would be if A, there was any real evidence that this was what happened, and B, it doesn't ultimately fall on Marobot. If a big YouTuber comes up to you and offers to pay you to draw them highly detailed thumbnails for their videos, and only offer you $10 per thumbnail, and you accept that offer, then I'm sorry, but that's on you. Doug Walker did not force Marobot to draw highly detailed thumbnails for him for next to nothing, and the insinuation that he did is grossly disingenuous on your part.
At least that Nightmare Fuel thumbnail will keep you awake long enough to get through the sketch they decided to put before the credits. No, your eyes and ears are not deceiving you. Doug decided to have a sketch featuring Tamara and Malcolm playing out how he thought Rango went into production, and it goes on for a full minute.
Why are you framing that as if it's some shocking revelation? Doug has been opening a lot of his reviews with long skits ever since he rebooted the Nostalgia Critic series. Acting as if you can't believe that he would dare do something like this is once again disingenuous.
It's a painful sketch where Tamra can't pull off acting as Gore Verbinski talking to Malcolm as the CEO of Nickelodeon in 2010, who, from what I could dig up, was not a black man but an Iranian-American woman named Kaima Zargami.
First off, why is Tamra's acting bad here? You can't just say that and move on, you have to argue the point. Second off, so what if the CEO of Nickelodeon Movies wasn't a black man? It's a sketch, not a fucking documentary. Calm the hell down.
And rattling off how this film took a year to produce, which, Doug, animation takes a while, go fuck yourself.
Did we watch the same skit? Because I don't think they ever took shots at the movie for taking a year to produce. They make fun of Gore Verbinski for some of the animation techniques he used.
I was wondering, though, if I could do something groundbreaking.
Like?
Like, have all of the actors physically act out all of the scenes.
It's animation, we have stand-ins for that.
They then make fun of him for not knowing that his animation technique would cost the studio more money.
But if it's the actual actors, it'll cost more and nobody will notice.
You know those are bad things, right?
They make fun of the movie for having a bog-standard story.
I know this is supposed to be a basic bitch kids movie.
Please don't refer to it as that.
Oh?
Refer to it as a blockbuster basic bitch kids movie. But you know, this is just an old Western version of the Liar Revealed story.
Exactly, it's a brand new tale no one's ever heard of.
You know that's one of the most overly used stories, right?
Name one other movie that used that formula.
Avatar, Bug's Life, Chicken Run, Over the Hedge.
Aside from those.
Shark Tale, The Tigger Movie, Galaxy Quest.
Alright, I get the idea.
Wedding Crashers, Aladdin, Claws.
You know some of these movies haven't even come out yet.
How to Train Your Dragon, Madagascar 3, Oz the Great and Powerful.
Okay, I'm hanging up.
Go ahead, I'll keep going. Yes Man, Bean, Bushwhack.
It's still avant-garde.
Jacob the Liar, The Road to El Dorado. Oh wait, let me look up some rom-coms.
And they make fun of Nickelodeon for not being interested in creating any new or original content.
Also, can it be a surreal existential journey with a Raoul Duke cameo?
Gore, we're Nickelodeon. We specialize in farting out SpongeBob and rebooting / destroying the Ninja Turtles.
But they never rattle off about how Rango took a year to produce. If you want to call the sketch unfunny, then that's perfectly fine. Go right ahead. Just don't lie about what happens in it.
If you think that we're just going to jump right into the opening interlude laying the film out on the table, nope! Video goes on for another minute and a half talking about tropes.
And that's a problem why?
Now, I will relent that he does have a point about certain tropes and tropes being used. They're tools after all, and they can be used effectively or they can completely screw everything up.
Okay, so if you ultimately agree with the point that Doug is trying to make about tropes, then why is it a problem for him to start his review out by talking about them?
I'm also not saying that you can't be pissed off if a certain trope shows up that you happen to loathe. Hell, I myself have tropes that I don't even like seeing, and I try to look into what it is about the trope I don't like.
Again, if you don't disagree with how Doug feels about overused tropes, then why are you taking such issue with his opening monologue?
Doug talks about the Liar Revealed being one of his most hated tropes, and let's just say that having knowledge of what was revealed in the Not-So-Awesome document made me go a little over-analytical on this.
Alright, I suppose now would be as good a time as any to address the elephant in the room.
On April 2nd, 2018, several former employees and contributors to Channel Awesome released a Google document that they had all pieced together titled Not So Awesome. The purpose of this document was to signal boost claims about the company's misdeeds, some of which were much more serious than others. The release of this document, and the company's lackluster responses to it, led to a huge falling out between Channel Awesome and the general public, with most of the site's remaining contributors leaving and Doug Walker himself having a permanent stain on his reputation.
As for why Magma Paint is alluding to this controversy in response to Doug's opening rant about overused tropes, well, I'll let her explain herself.
Like, I get why people hate The Liar Revealed. When it's done poorly, you know the reveal is coming from a mile away, and the only reason it goes on for that long is because the surrounding characters have the IQ of a banana, or it makes the story morally reprehensible. I have another theory as to why this is, and that's when a good Liar Reveal plot comes up, it unwittingly holds up a mirror to Doug and shows him the ugly truth he refuses to accept. That would be that Doug really is a sham, whose act really does hurt people around him, but he'd rather ignore it because of his own narcissism. And when people naturally blue screen a death in response, he can't stand it because, how dare you feel used? How absolute dare you be hurt that you found out I strung you along and I'm not as great as I made myself out to be?
There are two major issues I take with her interpretation. First of all, there are holes in many of the claims that are made in the Not-So-Awesome document.
For example, one of the claims in the document is that during the filming of the company's one-year anniversary movie, Suburban Nights, the cast and crew had not been accommodated with any food nor water. However, not only is there video evidence of one of the company's founders alerting the cast and crew that he's going to be getting them food and drinks,
I'm going to be getting bottled water, a first aid kit, and I'm going to be getting food for everybody, so I'll have a clipboard.
The first aid kit is only for Spoonie, so if anyone else needs any...
But Liz Skochel, aka Iron Liz, one of the people who worked on the film, testified in a YouTube comment that the management of Channel Awesome did provide the cast and crew with craft services. They weren't good craft services, mind you, but they were there. Worse than all of that, however, is that another Channel Awesome contributor, Alison Pregler, or Obscurus Lupa, contradicted this claim within the same document by testifying that the company did pay for the cast's meals during filming hours. Another false claim in the document comes from Channel Awesome's former HR representative, Holly Brown, who alleges that she wasn't allowed to pre-schedule when she could do her job, meaning she was made to work through holidays, social events, and even medical appointments. She even alleges that she was made to drive to the Channel Awesome studio after having just had a major surgery, against the orders of her doctor, only to be told that she was being fired from the site. Aside from the fact that there's no evidence to support any of the claims Holly makes against Channel Awesome's management, which automatically casts doubt on said claims, Channel Awesome themselves show chat logs between Holly and the management which show Mike, Doug, and Doug's brother Rob telling her that she didn't have to come to work since she had just had a major surgery. Chat logs which were provided within their own response to the Not-So-Awesome document. There are a ton of other claims from the document that have had their legitimacy questioned, if not outright debunked, but I don't have the time or energy to go through them, so I'm instead just gonna steal clips from a better video on the Channel Awesome drama that was made by somebody who did all of the work for me. Take it away, editor.
Gonzo claimed that Mike Machad refused to let him make a memorial video for Juwario after his suicide because he wasn't popular enough, going so far as screaming because nobody knows who you are in his face to humiliate him. Sounds bad, right? Well, here's the thing. It's debated if that story even happened, since a friend of the Change the Channel crowd, yeah, it turned into a whole crowd, by the name of Cinematic Venom, says he got an email from an insider that says that story was completely made up.
Juwario Memorial episode being prevented from happening. Total fiction. This is something he made up at some point. Gonzo used this as an excuse to try to convince us that leaving the site was a good idea. Once we left and the idea of a memorial show was again brought up, he simply said he had zero interest in doing it.
Juwario's big claim to fame is supposedly sexually assaulting a woman known as Screaming Mantis at a convention one year, who was actually the wife of Brad Jones. Story goes that she got blackout drunk with her friends and Juwario offered or was told to take her back to her hotel room. It's unclear if he was put up to it or suggested the idea himself. After that, he supposedly assaulted her and left. I have to use qualifying terms because none of this was ever taken to law enforcement, meaning nothing was properly handled. Still, the higher-ups were made aware of the incident and Juwario was fired sometime later. The document claims that the higher-ups were aware Juwario was a predator for over a year before taking any action. Now, I know you might be asking, well, why did it take so long for that to be handled? That's kind of fucked up. That's the thing, it didn't. Juwario was fired and Channel Awesome downright hired an attorney a mere 3 weeks after the Screaming Mantis incident. The story about them protecting him for over a year is fake. In fact, Channel Awesome themselves were the ones who outed Juwario as a sex pest, either intentionally or unintentionally. When they were responding to the document, they showed chat logs to debunk certain claims, and they didn't properly Photoshop out Juwario's name, even revealing the timeline of when the potential sex pest was fired, which matched up perfectly with when Juwario left the site, down to the day.
What all of this means is that taking what's written in the Not So Awesome document at face value and using it to argue that Doug hates the liar reveal trope because it reminds him that he's a narcissist who refuses to admit that he's done anything wrong, despite many of its claims against Doug being flimsy at best, is incredibly disingenuous, if not flat out dishonest. Also, how does any of this disprove what Doug was actually saying about how the use of certain tropes can hurt one's enjoyment of a story?
Guys, we're only 4 minutes into the episode, and just now we're getting around to introducing the film. And that opening interlude isn't really helping. In fact, it more or less contains everything he's going to say, and he already answered his question in it.
The opening monologue does not contain everything that Doug is going to say about Rango, and even if it did, what is so wrong with opening your review of a movie by first giving your summarized thoughts of said movie, and then further expounding on those thoughts the further you get into the movie? It's Doug's review. He can structure it however the hell he wants, so long as he isn't lying about what happens in the movie.
Soundtrack by Rango Arizona? What movie are you trying to be right now?
I'm not sure what the Rango Arizona comment was supposed to be about, but if it's in regards to the soundtrack, dude, you need to listen to more mariachi music. I'm obviously not a musical expert, but a substantial amount of mariachi music or Western scores that take inspiration from it has these vocalizations and yodels, for lack of a better term. Hell, anything with a more folksy sound has these vocalizations in there, and you want to take a guess as to why this is? It's because they're trying to get you into the setting of a Western taking place in the southwestern part of the US.
Dude, it was a joke about how the film was paying homage to another film by using one of the same songs from its soundtrack. It is not that deep.
As the celebrity live-action references, or emotion capture as they call it.
Instead of motion capture, it's kind of emotion capture.
Jesus, Hollywood. Doesn't appear to add that much. At least with Polar Express, the idea was to make these people look and move more realistically. To varying results, but that was the idea. Again though, these aren't people, they're animals, and they're designed so odd, I don't think they need them to move that real.
And this is where Doug shoots his statements in the head, which is going to be a running theme of this review. This entire talking point right here is a perfect example outing himself that he really doesn't know what goes into animation without telling me he really doesn't know what goes into animation. Okay, so I'm going to get a little technical here, but when drawing or animating something, you can't always get by with just going off how you envision it in your head. Sometimes you need some references to get a better idea of how to compose something, finer details, timing, and so on.
Yes, but Doug's point was that the animation technique that the producers used didn't give them the effect that they were trying to go for.
as the celebrity live-action references, or emotion capture as they call it, doesn't appear to add that much.
He then argues that these characters didn't need to move or emote that realistically since they weren't realistic humans, but rather exaggerated depictions of animals.
Again though, these aren't people, they're animals, and they're designed so odd, I don't think they need them to move that real.
You're justifying why the producers used this emotion capture technique, but you're not addressing Doug's criticism that this technique was neither necessary nor successful in what they were trying to accomplish.
With posing and choreography, having your friends pose with props for a piece or a director having the actors roughly act out how the scene should go gives the project a reference to work off of that can then be adjusted in the sketching stage or animation pipeline.
That's really interesting and all, but how does any of this debunk Doug's complaints with these techniques?
I don't think it's a crime or faux pas to call the technique emotion capture as the crew did in behind-the-scenes interviews.
Neither did Doug. He just found the term goofy. Listen to the way he reacts when Johnny Depp uses it.
Instead of motion capture, it's kind of emotion capture.
Jesus, Hollywood.
Does that clip really scream somebody who's thinking, oh my god, I can't believe that Johnny Depp would have the nerve to call this technique emotion capture. He should be waterboarded in cow urine. No, he just thought that the name was dumb. Chill the fuck out.
Plus, this is a subset of an animation technique called rotoscoping. If you look at this dancing walrus from Minnie the Moocher, or even the first Once Upon a Dream sequence from Sleeping Beauty set side by side with the respective behind-the-scenes feature, you'll notice that the actors were first filmed in a room with a couple of props for staging reference, and then that footage was used frame by frame to recreate that animation nearly one-to-one. With the advent of CGI in more recent animation history, we'd get motion capture, which requires the actors to wear a rig that cameras and software track the movement of to create a near-exact copy in the animation pipeline for more realistic movement.
How does any of this refute Doug's point that the technique was unnecessary and failed to achieve the effect that the filmmakers were going for?
What's funny is that Doug brought up both The Polar Express and Mars Needs Moms, two films by Maker Image Studios that use motion capture for their animation. Motion capture itself has nothing to do with the art direction, it's just the movement of those models, which is why the characters in Polar Express look alright and everything is congruous to how it moves, and Mars Needs Moms looks like everything got stuck halfway through Revolution and the movement of these abominations isn't doing them any favors.
But Doug's whole point regarding the Polar Express was that motion capture was used in that movie in order to get the realistic looking characters to move realistically.
At least with Polar Express, the idea was to make these people look and move more realistically. To varying results, but that was the idea.
Implying that he recognizes that there's a difference between the way a character is animated and the way that a character is designed. And if you'll notice, Doug's complaint with Rango was that the animation techniques that its producers used failed to capture the emotions that its producers wanted their characters to express.
As the celebrity live-action references, or emotion capture as they call it, doesn't appear to add that much.
So this isn't a complaint about the character designs, but rather about the animation itself, meaning that this entire tangent fails to address Doug's criticism of the film. Thanks for wasting our time, Magma Paint.
Another use for motion capture is the rising number of VTubers, where the real person behind the scenes will use the rig while the capture software and virtual model will follow and track that rig in near real time. Obviously, this doesn't always go as planned, and you're going to have a number of buggy attempts while looking uncanny, so film productions with animation will just go the route of creating reference footage to use in the animation pipeline.
Oh my god. We are 3 minutes into this point, and you have yet to address Doug's criticisms of the animation techniques used in Rango. How much more drawn out can this video possibly be?
And you know I was going to mention it eventually.
2 minutes? You mean to tell me that you continue to talk about nothing for 2 minutes? Fuck it. At least you provided a timestamp that I can skip to. Editor, you know what to do.
Bringing my simping for this band back around to Rango's production, the actors on the mock-up sets may not be giving one-to-one performances of how the characters in animation would move in each scene in the final animation pass, but they're creating more of a template to work off of, with the tone, line delivery, and interactions intact.
Okay, and Doug felt that it didn't achieve that effect when it came to how the characters emoted. Are you ever gonna get around to addressing that point?
For Christ's sake, this film was repeatedly cited and accused of motion capture usage when that's not at all what the animation process did, and the film runners had to come out and say, no, this isn't motion capture, we just shot some really good reference choreography to use while building this.
And that's Doug's problem. Why?
You can't just take the reference footage and the polished up final passes made from those references using the art direction and tweaks in mind and claim one part of the animation process is pointless or insinuate that it's pointless, because you can only go so far filming real people before the animation needs to take over to bring out the fullest of those performances.
Then prove Doug's point wrong by analyzing scenes from the movie where the characters' facial expressions succeed at helping them convey the general mood or atmosphere of said scenes, because that's what you're gonna need to do in order to prove him wrong.
If you guys couldn't already tell by my lengthy discussion of this particular point, I'm a little tired of Doug continually showing that he knows next to nothing about what goes into making convincing animation and the difference between the art direction and the actual movement, or anything about convincing choreography and directing.
This coming from the woman who spent the past 4 fucking minutes expositing about the animation techniques used in Rango, instead of actually addressing the point that Doug was making about said techniques being unnecessary and unsuccessful.
And is instead played by, is it Isla or Esla? I better look it up online and see how other people pronounce it.
Esla Fisher! Oh, that sweet honey from Wedding Crashers?
He seems trustworthy.
Oh, go fuck yourself, you narcissistic chode! I know he pronounces her name correctly afterward, but using himself as a reliable source, even as a joke, makes me a special kind of pissed.
Can we all take a step back here and recognize that Magma completely missed the point of the joke? The punchline of Doug's joke wasn't that he's a reliable source of information. It was that he's an idiot for thinking of himself as a reliable source of information. Listen to the way that he delivers that line about being trustworthy.
Esla Fisher! Oh, that sweet honey from Wedding Crashers?
He seems trustworthy.
He is being sarcastic, you narcissistic chode. He even pronounces the actress's name correctly from this point forward to prove that he got the pronunciation wrong. Why would he do that if the joke was that he is a reliable source of information?
Your joke doesn't work because you've been exposed as a narcissist who only sees value in your own stuff, and the idea of checking someone else is laughable to you.
Doug is only interested in his own opinion and doesn't listen to what others have to say, huh?
Then you're gonna have to explain to me why this guy allowed his employee to recover from a major surgery before going back to work, constantly sought insight from his fellow cast members as to how to go about filming a sexually suggestive scene from one of his anniversary movies, made an entire series of videos dedicated to covering the biggest fuck-ups in his reviews, and, when confronted with memes and videos made at his expense, had this to say about it.
How hypocritical would it be if I'm like, look at this person who doesn't appreciate my art, when I literally make a living mocking people's art? Like, how hypocritical would that be? So the idea that people can watch something and enjoy it, hate it, mock it, laugh with it, laugh at it, whatever,
is amazing to me, because I didn't expect any of that. To me, I know you can be, like, insulted as someone that doesn't, you know, like the work I put out there. First of all, I've been doing this 14 years. Majority of them get praise. I mean, if I'm gonna get upset, this one really, a lot of people didn't like it. I'm so fucking lucky. I mean, to be in this field where it's like, oh no, one that people really didn't like. I like the idea of putting something out there that is also a production, that I'm putting something out there that can also be reviewed. It's not something that's like, oh, it's bulletproof because, you know, it's a review. No, it can also be critiqued. The visuals can be critiqued. The ideas can be critiqued. The characters, the dialogue, the music as well. So for me, for people to get that passionate and talk about it, do you hope it's something they like? Yes, but even if it's something that they're just getting so passionate and they feel it's worth talking about, that to me is elevating what reviews can be and should be, which is a form of art, whether it's good art or bad art. So I personally don't take offense at something like that. I'm glad they're talking about it. I'm glad they're critiquing a critique. Like, that's, I don't know, maybe I'm a simple guy, but that's amazing to me. To me, that's saying, okay, reviewing has really reached a point where it is becoming like this work of art that can also be talked about. And that's more important to me than, like, my ego being bruised.
Yep, Doug Walker definitely strikes me as the kind of narcissistic chode who believes that his opinion is superior to all others.
And we know by now that your idea of research is the class slacker that just goes with the first Google search result.
Yeah, unlike you, whose idea of research is to take unsubstantiated claims made by random nobodies on Twitter and use them as the basis for a rant about how people don't value the work of artists the same way that you do.
Anyone who disagrees with this, you're probably the kind of person who tries to hackle commission artists to lower their prices because you think you're above the artist, or you offer to pay them in exposure. Either way, you're a dick.
Kindly take your head out of your ass.
He starts talking about Bean's defense mechanism where she'll suddenly lock up out of nowhere, which is an actual defense mechanism in some animals to dissuade a predator from further investigating them. Basically, if you stop moving and stay perfectly still, whatever was considering making a snack out of you or seeing you as a threat will lose interest in further investigation and leave.
Thank you for that completely unnecessary bit of information that doesn't refute anything that Doug said about the character of Beans. This video really needed it.
And this is the part where I knew this was going to quickly become one of the hardest videos I've ever done. This joke is not funny. Whatever you think of the politicians he was taking jabs at with this joke isn't that important, and I'm not here to tell you what to think about them. Pointing out or hinting at certain events like a movement that started with good intentions but quickly became a witch hunt to go after people the ones in the movement simply didn't like can color interactions in this movie a certain way is tacky.
Alright, I don't necessarily agree with Magma, but what she's saying here isn't totally insane. Her point is essentially that Doug's joke is unfunny. Given that humor is subjective, and what makes someone laugh varies from person to person, I would have been perfectly content to skip right on past this point if it weren't for what she said immediately afterwards.
Hindsight may be 20/20, but there's no way anyone can predict how interactions like this will be seen in the future.
Sure, but does that really make Doug wrong for joking that Rango's interactions with Beans throughout the movie can kinda look weird in hindsight?
The only thing I will say that shouldn't have to be said is yes, harassment is bad, no matter who it's coming from.
When the hell did Doug say that harassment wasn't bad? All he did was make a joke about how Rango's actions won't be seen as bad by the general public because our society's leaders have gotten away with doing it.
Well, I've seen our current and previous president do this, so I don't see the harm.
But where in those few seconds does Doug say that harassment is good?
And yes, you should come forward to authorities first if you find yourself in such a situation and in any actual danger.
And if Doug had actually said the opposite of that, this point might actually mean something.
Mistakes can happen while sorting it out, but you'll do yourself more favors if you stay honest and transparent about any misconduct than if you make a media circus out of it.
You mean like how the Not So Awesome document dropped the ball on the Jew Wario allegations by choosing to keep certain details and testimonies private for the sake of keeping their own reputations clean, and chose to make a media spectacle of said serious allegations instead of taking them to the proper authorities?
But there's another reason why it took so long for it all to be handled. Someone was playing defense for Jew Wario, according to rumor. Someone who is intimately involved in the Channel Awesome document. You might remember a woman named Holly, one of the assistants to the Walker brothers, who detailed stories about long work hours. Holly was a big figure in covering up Jew Wario's escapades, to the point that she apparently tried to frame Lord Cat as the sex pest in Channel Awesome.
Here, so hi.
What's up, Mantis? Mantis was the chick I referred to as the chick whose breast I grabbed, because I try not to refer to her as Screaming Mantis because God knows how many people are gonna fucking attack her. So all right, so for the record, so I have this recorded on audio, and just for the record, I just want to know, do you hate me or blame me in any way, shape, or form for what happened, or do you regret any way, shape, or form what happened that night?
No, absolutely not.
There
I
you
don't
go.
blame you. I don't blame you for jack shit, any of you, and I never did. And the people who said anything about it that I did is full of shit.
And in the Screaming Mantis story, it's implied she's done it more than once, outright saying not again when she went to the room and found a Vulplex plushie that Jew Wario supposedly left behind.
Apparently on the Saturday night of this MagFest, this person I know who's going to remain anonymous got way too drunk, as she kind of did during that period of time. She was already having a bad time, and she runs into Jew Wario. And at first, things are kind of okay, and then he apparently starts getting a little pushy. But it hasn't crossed the line yet. It's just one of those, okay, he's obviously drunk too, maybe he's not, like, getting the hint. Okay, so she gets into her room, she walks through the door, immediately fucking just trips over a table, passes out on the floor. Now here's where it gets graphic. So she wakes up and she realizes that someone is naked next to her. And this is her tale of events. Someone naked next to her, and they have their fingers in her vagina. Earlier during the convention, Justin Carmichael had a Vulpix. Holly meets with this person because this person trusted her, and she comes into the room, sees the stuffed animal, and goes, "Where did that come from?" And this is before she even I told her what had happened, and she's like, "Oh, that was Justin's." To which Holly apparently, allegedly says, "Oh no, not again."
Defending and hiding a sexual predator? Check. Yes, Holly knew about Justin the entire time as well. Hey, Kaylin, what was it you said? Or maybe I would have done the same thing more than 5 years ago if somebody had told me about Justin then. And what did you say, Allison? And then, I found out he knew about a sexual predator in the company and made a monetized video memorializing him after his death. But Holly knew. Why are you friends with someone who covered up for a sexual predator? The group chat that exposed this whole thing, Holly is right there during the entire conversation. She claims that she didn't say anything at the request of the victim. Now that's fair enough, but why doesn't Channel Awesome get that excuse? How come you can stay quiet for the victim, but when it comes to them, no, they covered it up? Or was the issue just because they did the tribute video? That I would understand, but it's never been made clear. You still allowed Justin to hang around with your friends knowing he was a rapist. You still allowed Kaylin to spend hundreds of dollars on a movie honoring his memory. How can you crap on Doug for intentionally paying tribute to a sexual predator when you intentionally didn't stop Kaylin unintentionally doing the exact same thing? You watched and said nothing, endangering all of them. In fact, that makes you more guilty because you were actually Kaylin's friend.
It is agreed upon that Holly was the one trying to protect Justin, if you go with the idea that these people are all liars, since Lorecat was framed as being a rapist and fired from the site, with her being a big pusher of the accusations. And this brings up the point I mentioned before, the 1816 one. They decided to include that story, which was of an 18-year-old woman willingly having sex with a man she didn't realize was married, and later regretted it. So they cooked up the mentally 16 detail to make it sound worse than buyer's remorse. They went with that story instead of Screaming Mantis, which is downright more disturbing and could have had more impact. But they couldn't do that because the latter story could possibly implicate Holly, one of the big contributors to the Awesome document. To pretend this was about protecting victims doesn't work either, since they already talked about Juwario being a living hentai squid to underage girls, and talked about one of his incidents without revealing any personal details. They simply didn't talk about this story because they didn't want to admit one of the contributors to the document made a major fuck-up.
Funny how things like that happen, isn't it?
The other bit about Doug making jokes like this is that we're now 5 years out from the Not So Awesome document release. A document where several former producers came forward to air grievances about things that happened with management behind the scenes, and a response from Channel Awesome to said document. If you've been paying attention, harassment from higher-ups and other producers was a regular complaint that resulted in the confirmation of Mike Ellis and the late Juwario being such sex pests the company has harbored and defended.
When it comes to Juwario, one could argue that the management of Channel Awesome defended him, since the company and several of its contributors did release tributes to the man after he committed suicide in 2014. If we forget that the allegations against him were just that, allegations. If no one came to the police about what he allegedly did, and no further evidence ties him to any wrongdoings, then can you really blame the site and its contributors for deciding to bite the bullet and honor his memory? Don't forget, some of the people who contributed to the Not So Awesome document put out their own tributes to Juwario after his passing, so why aren't you going after any of them for defending a sex pest? Also, Channel Awesome did not harbor anyone. The company booted Juwario from their site 3 weeks after being told he was a sex pest. As for Mike Ellis, Channel Awesome claimed that he resigned from the company and didn't attempt to contact anyone within it after his sexual misdeeds were reported to Mike Machad. Admittedly, we're just taking the company's word for it, but considering that the Not So Awesome document contains plenty of lies, I don't think it's unreasonable for me to expect you to prove that they harbored either Justin or Mike Ellis. Come on, lady. You had no problem linking to videos which break down the Johnny Depp vs. Amber Heard case, so why couldn't you show us more than one screenshot of conversations that Channel Awesome's management had about these allegations? A screenshot, by the way, which is of them confirming with one another that they were getting rid of one of the supposed sex pests.
Oops.
That may be a valid point, Alex, but nonetheless, all of this should have been reported to the authorities. Fair enough, but once again, the people making these allegations also didn't report them to the authorities. You can't get onto Channel Awesome for not doing enough about these situations when their detractors also made the same mistakes.
That the Walker brothers and Machad knew they were harboring and defending.
I refer you to the last minute and a half of my video.
What I'm saying is Doug Walker isn't in a position to make these kinds of jokes, period.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
'Cause this is filling up the time. An hour and a half is just too long for uncreative minds.
Is there anything else about the bar scene I could talk about other than herp derp Nickelodeon humor?
I love how you paint Doug's praise for the film's humor in such a negative way when, if you go back and listen to what he actually says about it, you'll find that he actually paints a far more favorable picture in regards to its quality, complimenting Nickelodeon for allowing the director to be as grotesque with his movie when most other studios wouldn't.
I do give credit that Nickelodeon let Verbinski go so gooey and gross. I guess that makes sense when you realize this is the same company that allowed Ren and Stimpy and Batman vs. the Ninja Turtles. I kind of forget how awesome they can be sometimes.
And even saying that the burp joke in Rango is one of the few burp jokes in a kid's movie that actually got a laugh out of him.
And I also give credit, this is one of the few burp jokes in a kid's film that gets a legit laugh out of me. I know this is a cartoon, it takes days to animate, but somehow that felt improvised.
Implying that he usually hates gross-out humor, which is the type of humor that Nickelodeon is most famous for. To make a long point short, Magma's little jab at Doug Walker's comedic taste falls completely flat under the most minute of inspection.
We're only halfway through this episode, and Doug's just now finished recapping Act 1.
What is the problem with that? It's Doug's review, so he can structure it however the hell he wants, so long as he isn't telling any lies.
But tell me, honestly, be 100% straightforward. Can't you tell from just this 2 seconds of film what the rest of the story is gonna be?
Water, Mr. Rango.
You got it, don't you? You got it. You may not even think you do, but just take a guess what happens in the rest of the movie, and you'll be correct. The mayor, played by Ned Beatty, is pretending to be good, but the twist is he'll be evil. He holds power because he controls the water, he has an evil plan to screw everybody over, and he's gonna use Rango in his plan because he's popular, and the rest follows the liar reveal story already set up. Be honest. Be honest! You got all of that from just that 2 seconds, didn't you? And look, a predictable story is not bad if a lot of new things are done with it. But like I said, the coolest stuff was in the first third. Now it's just this run-of-the-mill story with no surprises.
Well, somebody's accusing the film of holding his hand too much. The first time I saw this movie was during its theatrical run in 2011 when I was 15, and I did not see any of this coming. At best, I could pick up on Tortoise John being sketchy as all get out, only because I've taken enough history classes to know that way too many authority figures in a leadership position are subject to corruption and sometimes incompetence.
So, your counter to Doug's complaint that the film's various plot twists were lampshaded far too heavily is to say, well, I didn't catch on to these plot twists when I first saw the movie. You realize that that's not an objective argument backed up by what actually happens in the film, right? That's a subjective anecdote. That would be like me countering your claim that Doug is unfunny by saying, well, I think he's hilarious. It doesn't work.
But then again, after watching Monsters, Inc. enough times, you'd pick up on Waternoose being the true villain. Actually, let's talk about these two since they're cut from a similar cloth. This might just be me, but Waternoose always had an intimidating presence, even as far back as 5-year-old me seeing Monsters, Inc. in theaters for the first time.
And Tortoise John doesn't?
Bossman isn't exactly someone you want to fuck with, even though he does have some more relaxed interactions with Sully, a clear favorite employee.
These exact same things can be said about Tortoise John. Not only does he work with shady bandits, but he also appoints Rango as the sheriff of Dirt while blowing smoke up his ass about how the people in town need somebody to believe in, which could count as a relaxed interaction with him.
Most of his interactions are conducted in a manner of seriousness and curtness associated with professionalism, and that's not exactly what I'd call warm or inviting.
The exact same thing can be said about Tortoise John, and that would only help Doug's point. So again, how does this debunk his complaint?
Waternoose's main presentation is that of a man at the top and has a lot riding on how he runs things with a toughness and an inherent scariness of being someone your job's fate is at the mercy of.
This can also be used to describe Tortoise John, only replace job with life.
When the twist comes that he's been running criminal exploits like the Scream Extractor and the kidnapping of children to keep it a viable tool, that presentation is still consistent with boss man you don't want to fuck with. Now with upping his aggression to keep the operations under wraps.
This exact same thing can be said about Tortoise John. So for the millionth time, I must ask, how does any of this debunk Doug's criticism?
Even then, Waternoose actually felt bad that he had to banish and silence Mike and Sully when Boo was discovered. It wasn't until after the duo got back to the corporation to rescue Boo and quickly get her back home that all bets were off.
You mean like how Tortoise John tried to prevent Rattlesnake Jake from killing Beans after she refused to sell her farm to him, and that it wasn't until Rattlesnake Jake told him to deal with the consequences of bringing him in as a mediator that all bets were off? Again, all of this horse hockey only strengthens Doug's point.
With Tortoise John, sure, they cut the casual angle with having a favorite, but all interactions between him and Rango are still cordial and professional.
And how does that make the movie's twists more subtle, exactly? As if there aren't tons of fictional villains who treat their opponents nicely, but whose evilness is still readily apparent to the audience due to their actors' vocal inflections, like the Kingpin from Netflix's Daredevil series.
He'll get agitated if someone questions his orders and authority, but any aggression is passed off to a designated muscle that he can work with, be it Bad Bill and the other goons working under him or Rattlesnake Jake.
So tell me, Magma, does the mayor openly working with criminals that the rest of Dirt is scared of not cast some doubt as to whether or not he's a good guy?
Unlike Sully showing the ability to hold his ground against Waternoose when it hits the fan, Tortoise John doesn't think Rango would pose that much of a threat to fight back, whether before or after the chameleon has been exposed as a fraud.
And that bit of information has nothing to do with whether or not the reveal that he's a villain is obvious or not.
Not really my best example, but something interesting to think about and show that Tortoise John being an obvious villain isn't as bad as Doug is making it out to be.
What? Did you just admit that Tortoise John is an obvious villain? But that goes against the very point that you were trying to argue, which was that Doug was wrong for trying to say that the film held his hand because you didn't catch on to all of the foreshadowing of its many twists when you first saw it.
Well, somebody's accusing the film of holding his hand too much. The first time I saw this movie was during its theatrical run in 2011 when I was 15, and I did not see any of this coming. At best, I could pick up on Tortoise John being sketchy as all get out, only because I've taken enough history classes to know that way too many authority figures in a leadership position are subject to corruption and sometimes incompetence.
Now you're saying that you agree with Doug's point, but that it doesn't hurt the movie as badly as he thinks it does? Why didn't you just say that? I still wouldn't have agreed, because Doug never said that these flaws made the film bad or unwatchable, but you would have at least spared us from 2 minutes of you rambling about inane nonsense.
The next minute or so is a bunch of jumbled observations like Beans and Angeline throwing snide remarks in the water ritual where Rango doesn't get an answer for what the hell is going on. In regards to the water ritual, they do answer it somewhat in the film itself. The citizens of Dirt gather at noon every Wednesday in the hopes of receiving hydration, not too dissimilar to regular Sunday church service.
Yeah, but that still doesn't explain why they perform this ritual.
We know that the citizens of Dirt do this weird ritual every Wednesday, and that it's in the hopes that they'll get water from their local spigot, but one, none of that information tells us why they think it'll work, or where the idea to do this even came from. And two, Rango isn't told any of this, which was what Doug was pointing out.
When the people are given water, they do this weird dance. Even Rango asks about it and doesn't really get an answer.
So, is this considered normal civic behavior?
Mm-hmm. Every Wednesday.
Oh, well that makes the bit work. Why are you dancing? Yes.
Did you just fall asleep while watching this review? Because that's the only good faith explanation that I could come up with for why you're so off base in a lot of your observations of Doug's critiques of this film.
For anything deeper than that, it's going to have to be treated kind of like Soliana's Festival of the Sun, where the god Solaris is worshipped. It's part of the culture, no one in Soliana questions it because it's a normal occurrence.
So, in other words, you have no counter to Doug's criticism. I am so glad that I wasted my time watching this video.
Obvious parody and Looney Tunes level of comedy sequences get some praise from Doug, but that's because he's watched a steady diet of Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry with barely any deviation, unless it's another show like the 1980s Ninja Turtles and Animaniacs that take these tropes and successfully replicate them. For the love of donuts and everything that is holy, please watch a different show, Walker.
Yeah. Why credit Doug for praising certain aspects of this film when we can instead insult him for daring to have a different sense of humor than us?
Also, where's your evidence that Doug has only watched a small number of shows? Yes, he's named Animaniacs and Looney Tunes as his biggest comedic influences, but that doesn't mean he'll only praise movies that tell the same kind of jokes that those shows did. Stop making all of these baseless assumptions about Doug's character and start addressing the things he actually says in this review.
Like I said, scenes like this do give a bit of charm, but there aren't that many in between the stale plot and forgettable side characters. And there are a lot of side characters to forget. I don't remember any of these folks' names or personalities outside of this one with an arrow in his eye. I think the reason being there's an arrow in his eye. Even this child, played by Abigail Breslin.
Again, I saw this movie when I was 15, and for a good few months after, the character design still stuck out. I could very well pick the characters out of a lineup and tell you their exact quirk and even their names, though names are something we don't hear too often, and that's definitely the film's fault. Fine.
Firstly, a great design does not a memorable character make. Secondly, once again, just because you can remember who these characters are, doesn't mean that everyone else will. You need to make an argument with evidence behind it, not an appeal to a subjective anecdote.
I also love how you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, by conceding that the names of these various side characters aren't said too often in the film, but also chastising Doug for not turning on the captions or searching these characters up online, as if it's on Doug to seek out information that should have been displayed more often in the movie itself. You cannot grant him the point and then try to dismiss it at the same time. It makes you look like a jackass.
Let's go down the line. In just the posse, I can pick out Waffles for being a horned lizard and kind of a derpy boy, the Colorado River Frog bartender, Doc being a medic rabbit with an ear missing, Spoons for his distinct voice and musical Spoons, the one with an arrow in his eye is Sergeant Turley, and I gotta give Wounded Bird some clever credit for being a Crow Indian.
Yeah, but would the average person be able to list any of these character traits or mannerisms if they had just finished watching the film for the first time? I'll give you credit for finally pointing to what the movie showed us of these characters to prove how they're memorable, but the question you need to answer is, are any of these characters' quirks showcased in the movie long enough to leave any kind of lasting impression on the audience? That's how you prove that these are memorable characters. You can't just appeal to the fact that they have quirks, because all fictional characters have quirks. Having a quirk doesn't make a character memorable, which is what Doug was arguing, that these characters aren't memorable.
I'm probably exposing myself as having not seen a lot of westerns to begin with, despite my dad having a lot of them in his collection, but I'm willing to take a guess that not a lot of side characters in those get much of a name drop.
Well, if you don't know, then you can't make that assertion. Also, this is an appeal to popularity. Well, other westerns do it, so it's okay for this western to do it. Sorry, but that's not an argument, sweetie.
So then, given how distinct these designs are and the associated quirks, I'm going to have to ask you to butt the shuck up about forgettable and cliché.
No. No, I don't think I will.
And to respond to your make the kid the villain if you want originality points take, what the hell is stopping you from making your own Western where that happens besides the fact that you cannot write a good plot or joke to save your ass? Don't lie to me! You've made 3 average at best movies, a failed Be Kind Rewind knockoff, and several sketches that prove it.
Did you seriously just try to pull the "why don't you do better" defense? I can't believe that I have to explain this, but one's inability to tell a good story does not negate their criticism of another person's story. If you suck at cooking and then go to a restaurant where they serve you expired, poorly cooked steak, do you suddenly lose the right to complain about the condition of your food just because you personally suck at cooking? No!
You'll be in charge of all tracking and finding the villains, utilizing your well-developed ingenuity. No offense.
None taken. In 2011, 10 years from now, maybe.
What?
What I'm doing is baiting Twitter. I know it's baiting Twitter, but I'm going to do it anyway while nodding my head around like a mental patient as we fade to commercial.
How is Doug baiting Twitter? All he did was make a joke about how some people might be offended that Rango called a Native American character an Injun in the current year. He doesn't make any value judgment as to whether or not these people are in the right for trying to cancel the movie over that. Calm the hell down, sister. It is not that deep.
Rango gets a group together to find the robbers and keeps consulting with the Injun Crow.
Pick up trail. 3 men heading west. 1 blind. 1 with enlarged prostate riding side saddle.
Depp studied his authenticity for when he played Tonto.
What?
Rango has another awkward as hell encounter when Bean freezes up again and he kisses her. We're still going by 80s college comedy rules, right? The following day they find the robbers and dress up like a theater group to trick them. Have I mentioned yet the funniest characters are the band?
I think they're thespians. Thespians? That's illegal in 7 states.
How is Twitter not canceled this yet?
Enough! Guys, this episode is really testing me. We're up to 4, arguably 5, jokes that do nothing but serve as Twitter bait because the world has just lost its goddamn mind that much from a guy who plays this card only when it'll bolster his ego and image.
For the love of God, they are just jokes. He doesn't actually want Twitter people to try and cancel this movie. Otherwise, he wouldn't have commended people for liking it at the end of his review.
And this definitely isn't a case of, oh, if you liked it, you must be ashamed. No, I love that you would love this movie. I love that something so weird and odd-looking that also has drops of existentialism in it can get a wide release for a kid's audience.
Were you on your period when you were watching this video? Because I just cannot understand why you're being such a tight-ass about this.
For the record, I don't like talking about these things because it's exhausting, and no matter how feet on the ground and level-headed I try to look at it, one side or the other is going to scream bloody murder about condoning it.
Not me. I'm going to scream bloody murder because you're attempting to smear Doug's character over a harmless joke that he made, which is very ironic considering that's what you claim Doug is trying to do to Rango.
I don't think anyone behind this film was actively trying or intending to do harm to whatever groups and situations they portrayed in it.
Good, because I'm pretty sure that Doug also doesn't think that this film was trying to harm any particular group of people.
And Doug trying to bait a certain group into throwing it to the wolves is irresponsible.
If he was, then he wouldn't have said all of this at the end of his review.
It's a little hard to stay too angry at a film that gets away with so much. But on the other hand, I do see what it could have been. And this definitely isn't a case of, oh, if you liked it, you must be ashamed. No, I love that you would love this movie. I love that something so weird and odd-looking that also has drops of existentialism in it can get a wide release for a kid's audience. What can I say? I'm a weird guy. And when something comes along saying it's really new and weird, I expect it to be really new and really weird. And for an oddball like me, it's just weird and new enough. Whatever your thoughts, I think we can all agree this is a film that brings the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes, that really sounds like a person who's just itching for a chance to cancel this movie, doesn't it?
It's the kind of overreaction that keeps the likes of Extra Credits in business can continue pushing out smooth-brained takes that kill comedy and all reasonable discussion.
Overreaction? Nigga, these are jokes! I'm pretty sure that you're the one who's blowing this shit out of proportion!
I also love how Magma is criticizing Doug for killing comedy by attempting to cancel movies over jokes he doesn't like, when this entire moralizing spiel of hers is based off a joke in Doug's review that she doesn't like. Who's the one trying to sanitize comedy again?
It keeps giving ammo to Puritans. In this case, it's giving ammo to the Puritans that grew up on Tumblr that have to keep pointing out how every stupid little thing under the sun is offensive to someone somewhere, and that people need to stop engaging with it like yesterday because it's literally killing people in the streets, don't you know?
I don't even disagree that these types of people exist, nor do I disagree that they should be criticized for being moral fags. I just don't see how Doug is supposedly catering to this crowd or enabling their insanity by making jokes about how some of the scenes in Rango could rub people the wrong way. I'm pretty sure I've made some of these exact same jokes, and I am the last nigga on the internet who will go to bat for cancel culture.
Once again, I'm not telling people how they should feel about these uncouth instances. I'm just telling you to use your discretion and not blow it out of proportion.
You realize that you just contradicted yourself, right? Telling people not to blow the uncouth moments in Rango out of proportion is telling them how to feel about said moments. Again, I agree that this film shouldn't be cancelled for having these edgy jokes, but let's not pretend that we aren't telling people how to feel about said edgy jokes, or that Doug wants the film cancelled over them.
You wanna know something that'll come back when I get to the bigger points? Rango came under controversy not because of depictions of certain groups or interactions that could be seen as creepy, but depictions of smoking and drinking. Because, yeah, having a Western, which takes place in rural areas, where smoking and drinking are common practice, having characters smoke and drink is too much for the audience.
What the hell do other people's complaints about this movie have to do with Doug's problems with it?
More talk about the chase scene, where it's pretty much him equating it to batshit wacky Wile E. Coyote hijinks, and we get one of the most ignorant rambles ever to come out of this geed.
They capture the robbers, but discover the water jug was empty before they stole it. Best get to what the kids really want. Conversations about capitalist expansion.
I was here before the highway split this great valley.
Control the water, and you control...
Begin to appreciate the broad sweep. You attribute divine power to me.
What are you building out here?
The future, Mr. Rank. The frontier town, the lawmen, there's just no place for them. I watched the march of progress.
Yeah, is this where you thought we'd be an hour after watching that? Even if you're a little kid seeing this cliche for the first time, why would this be entertaining to you?
This whole sequence regarding Tortoise John's vision for the future and the eventual collapse of Dirt is an obvious discussion of how you can't stop progress and evolution and you have to adapt in order to survive. If that means leaving the antiquated staples of an era behind, so be it. And may God have mercy on you if you try to keep the old ways alive when they're not only incompatible with the new era, but refuse to assimilate.
I'm really glad that you understood what themes this scene was trying to convey, and I don't disagree with your interpretation of this scene, but how does any of this address Doug's criticism? Which is that all of this would not only fly over the heads of children, which are its primary demographic, but that it is also not fun for them to watch. Again, all of this stuff is really neat to learn, and I don't disagree with any of it, but how does any of this prove that children would be able to grasp a lick of it, or that this scene is fun for them to watch? Doug never even said that farmers have it easy, nor that drought-stricken farmland isn't a problem. You're just putting words in the man's mouth. Look, if you want to say that his take on Rango is bad, that's fine. I myself do not agree with everything that he said in his review of the movie. But do not lie about what the man said.
Another way to look at it, at least from my personal interpretation, is a meta-commentary on the death and all but complete abandonment of the Western genre. Westerns had their time in the limelight for a good while during the 1950s when they were at their peak. The stories of gunslingers riding through the desert, taking the law into their own hands, are to the most iconic of Americana as legends of samurai on horseback slashing down foes in the feudal era are to essential Japanese culture, or tales of knights in shining armor valiantly storming a castle to slay the dragon and win the lady fair to classic European iconography. But as years went on and the genre became saturated, people started losing interest. Technology kept advancing, we became captivated with outer space as the first astronauts set foot on the moon, sprawling cities with towering skyscrapers became more appealing, and the Western started dying. You can still find plenty of old shows and novels about the cowboys of the Old West, but good luck finding any new ones that aren't a parody or deconstruction and opt to play it straight. Westerns were losing viability for return on investment and aren't the hip, cool thing anymore. Why continue keeping the Wild West alive when the rest of society has moved on?
For the last time, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you've said, but how does any of this prove that children would be able to grasp any of this stuff, and that the conversation between Rango and Tortoise John would be entertaining for them to watch, which is what Doug actually said?
I could tell you why it's important to preserve the Western genre and still give it a shot in storytelling if that kind of thing strikes your fancy, but right now I'm just absolutely gobsmacked that Doug didn't get the bigger picture of this particular sequence.
It's not that Doug himself didn't get the bigger picture behind this scene, it's that he thinks that children wouldn't be able to get it, nor would they be entertained by it.
Let's get to what the kids really want. Conversations about capitalist expansion. Yeah, is this where you thought we'd be an hour after watching that? Even if you're a little kid seeing this cliche for the first time, why would this be entertaining to you? Lex Luthor was at least fun to listen to when he discussed his complicated plan. This Otisburg spin-off isn't nearly as entertaining.
Again, stop putting words in the man's mouth.
Suspecting Rango is getting too close, he calls Rattlesnake Jake, played by Bill Nighy. This is another character that's written dull as a rock, but I'll give him this. He looks and sounds pretty intimidating.
Hello, brother. Thirsty?
Do you fear fangs?
Listen close, you pathetic fraud. This is my town.
Good thing Bill Nighy was there as a reference, too. He moves exactly like a snake. See why this was kind of dumb?
First, I'll redirect anyone who missed it back to my extended spiel about using references in animation because I've lost my patience for this man queefing all over the process that goes into this art form.
Oh, you mean the spiel that didn't actually address the criticisms that Doug had about the animation techniques, and instead tried to justify why the flaws he was critiquing were there? Is that the spiel you're talking about, Magma? Because I don't really want to go back to that. Also, Doug isn't even critiquing the animation here. Rather, he's critiquing the producers for filming real-life reference footage because it's utterly unnecessary, as the voice actor of Rattlesnake Jake doesn't actually move like a snake.
Second, this is something I'll probably have to talk about more in the Osmosis Jones and Inside Out Q&A, but if you're going to recap the introduction and presence of a key villain or antagonist of a film, fucking talk about them.
But he did. I'm sorry that he didn't go as in-depth on it as you would have wanted him to, but it's his review, and he can structure it however the hell he wants. If he isn't saying anything that's objectively incorrect, then who cares how long he spends talking about the secondary antagonist of a film?
Diamondbacks are one of the most dangerous reptiles you could come across in the American desert. How do you not think to make one of the most feared outlaw in the Old West?
When did Doug say or even imply that the producers were wrong to make their dangerous outlaw a diamondback snake? Again, you are blatantly just putting words in his mouth.
And I suppose that segues directly into Rango's blue screen of death and how much Doug thoroughly missed the entire point. Say what you want about the sequence going on for 5 minutes, but the imagery and score as Rango trudges through the desert is absolutely sublime. The time-lapse of the stars and cactus blooms give you that feeling of time being distorted as everything came crashing down to give Rango his time to ruminate. He finds his possessions from the terrarium he was thrown out of just days ago to realize that those friends are as imaginary as his old life, now that he's interacted with real folks in far more real conversations. Rango comes to realize that he was living a lie, both as a theater-loving pet and as the man with no name that came out of the desert that a whole town came to count on. And the best part about this sequence? Rango, knowing he's a fraud with nothing going for him, starts crossing the road, not even bothering to keep a lookout for the cars and trucks passing through. He doesn't get hit once. No cars swerve out of the way. I mean, not that they'd even notice a chameleon that size anyway. And he doesn't care if he lives or dies. But he makes it to the other side, accepting he has passed the event horizon as a result of his own ego. All with visuals and minimal dialogue. It's an extended, quiet moment that I think does more and better than any of the hallelujah moments in the Shrek films, which is the term coined by Schaefer Ellis Productions for sequences where Shrek is alone and about to lose all the good things in his life as an appropriately fitting sad song soundtracks it. And those are some damn good, phenomenal scenes! Going back to my earlier theory about how good Liar Revealed plots hold up a mirror to Doug Walker and show him what he really is, I'm inclined to believe that this scene not only flies over his head, but he actively refuses to engage with it. If he did, he would have to admit that he's an awful person who took advantage of people in a similar fashion and show some honest introspection, genuine soul-searching, and after admitting the truth is uncomfortable, that the only way to change it is to improve himself as a person and improve his craft. But he's not going to. He's far too narcissistic to do such reflection and make any meaningful change and lacks empathy.
Oh wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Magma Paint, from the bottom of my heart, go fuck yourself. You present no evidence that this is how Doug actually feels about himself, nor that he actually abused people in the way that you claim he did.
Also, fuck you for your joke about Johnny Depp. The man isn't a saint, but he didn't deserve any of the shit Amber Heard put him through, or being thrown under the bus as he was by Disney and other possible companies after it was shown that Amber Heard was the monster in the situation.
And Doug never said that he deserved any of what happened to him. His joke was merely that Depp probably feels the way that Rango does in this scene after everything he went through.
Who am I? I'm nobody.
To Depp's credit, this might be how he spends his nights recently.
Do you ever get tired of... I was gonna say putting words in people's mouths, but no, blatantly lying. Do you ever get tired of just blatantly lying about people?
I will say the redemption arc is a little creative. He encounters the spirit of the West, again possibly on the verge of death, and it turns out to be Clint Eastwood. I also like that the idea is he has to check his ego, like it's not about him, it's about these other people he should help. That's what gives him his identity. Not necessarily what he thinks, but what he does.
For what it's worth, at least there's some headway in him giving credit where credit is due with the encounter with the Spirit of the Rest, being personified as Clint Eastwood, portrayed by Timothy Olyphant. He's at least getting that Rango's ego may have gotten him into the situation, but he still has the fundamental of doing the right thing for others.
I love how Magma completely ignores how that clip from Doug's review totally debunks her point that the reason Doug hates this sulking scene is because his own failings as a person keep him from realizing that having a big ego and being selfish is a bad thing. I'm sorry, but if Doug is such a narcissist that he refuses to credit a film for forcing its main character to accept failings that he himself suffers from, then why is he saying any of this? Riddle me that one, Sherlock.
Had Rango been a more funny or interesting character in a less standard and convoluted story, this would have been a lot more powerful to me.
Half credit only because he just keeps holding a stock story beat against the movie. One more time for the people in the back. Tropes are tools.
Once again, this is argumentum ad populum. This happens in a bunch of other stories, so it's perfectly okay for it to happen in this one. You're just appealing to it relying on tropes as if that justifies what Doug perceives as its flaws.
Also, real quick, you see this cut right here? I did not edit this footage at all. There's literally a gap that someone missed in the video editing. I guess that weekly upload schedule is finally catching up with him the same way the 3-year production cycle is catching up with Pokemon.
Magma, I'm about to bring up something that's going to blow your mind. Prepare yourself, because I'm not entirely sure that you're gonna be able to handle this. Here it is. The Nostalgia Critic is a monetized YouTube channel. What this means is that he gets to run ads on his videos and make money from them. What this means is that those little gaps in his video are where the ads are supposed to be playing. Totally fucking bonkers, I know. I'm sorry, but even if you're using an ad blocker, it should be obvious that those black screens are meant to signify when the ads are supposed to be playing. Were it not for all of the other bullshit that you've been spewing in this video, I might have been inclined to just write this off as an innocent little mistake. But because you've been doing nothing but spewing bullshit, I'm going to take the bad faith plunge and assume that you're just lying about him.
Again, no explanation why these trees can walk or if it's a hallucination, it just sorta happens. And goddammit, I wish there was more of it. I want this movie to explain less, to think outside the box, to be that film you couldn't easily explain. But whenever it gets close, it returns back to its safe space of getting everybody to love him again.
You know, considering the many times Doug accuses this film of holding his hand when it clearly isn't,
you partially conceded his point when you admitted that Tortoise John was an obvious villain.
Tortoise John being an obvious villain isn't as bad as Doug is making it out to be.
For the love of God, woman, be consistent.
Does anyone here think that after years and years of media consumption that this guy not only failed to internalize any of it, but thinks he's 4 parallel universes ahead of everyone and that he's better than the plebs because of how much media he's consumed?
No, I don't think that at all. I think Doug was just saying that he would have liked the film a lot more if it had been way more surreal with its story. In fact, nowhere in that clip does Doug berate people who enjoy it regardless of how safe he thinks the story was.
Rango has 1 bullet left in his mouth, but Beans accidentally swallows it and freezes up again.
One last bullet to kill one last outlaw.
How bad does this look? I guess not bad enough.
Oh, screw off!
You must be really fun at parties.
But wait, what about that stuff about Rango dying?
Although he is certain to die, perhaps from a household accident, the people of the village will honor his memory.
Okay. That is so lazy, I kinda love the shit out of it.
I think that's the joke that's been building the whole time. The mariachi owls themselves this whole film weren't confident Rango would make it out of the story with his mortal coil intact, but he did! And I don't see that as talking down to an audience.
Neither does Doug. He literally just said that the joke was stupid, but that he still enjoyed it regardless. Calm the fuck down.
And just like with his closing summary from the Powerpuff Girls movie review, this one is as close as we're going to get to any semblance of an actual review and summation of his thoughts on the movie, but it ends up shooting the last 20 minutes in the head. I'm all for inviting the audience to check something out for themselves to form their own idea and opinion on something, but that's not how you should be closing out a review if so much keeps flying over your head.
Why not? Don't you think that if Doug so poorly understood what messages this film was trying to convey, that it would be good of him to direct people to go watch it for themselves? That way, people might find out what Doug completely misrepresented about the film and appreciate it for what it was trying to achieve. Ergo, not only is he encouraging people to form their own opinions about media, but he's also bringing more attention to what I think we can both agree is an underrated movie. What is the fucking problem with that?
What this movie was ultimately trying to do was use the Western template to be a love letter to the genre while also putting together something fun and artistic that also goofs around with a lot of the tropes. Considering what Doug considers a love letter to existing media and that Yosemite Sam versus Bugs Bunny cartoons but cranking up the mature audiences warrant is what he was probably expecting out of this, I don't think anyone's going to be sore with me when I say that this movie is just too much for him to digest.
And the award for the most hypocritical criticism ever given in a response goes to Magma Paint. Tell her what she's won, Dr. Cox.
Nothing.
And now, for the thing that I said I had slow cooking several times.
Kids movie, children's western, kids movies, kids film, family film, kids what the kids really want. Even if you're a little kid seeing this cliche for the first time, kids film, kids audience, kids film.
This is not a kids movie.
Oh really? It's not? Then why don't we go check what the film's rating is?
Huh. Would you look at that? PG. Do you know what PG means? Parental guidance, aka family friendly.
Now, while the meaning of family friendly has certainly changed throughout the decades, that doesn't erase the fact that this film was aimed at children and their families.
Kids can watch it, but there's so much in there that they won't be able to appreciate until they're older.
A kids movie having more mature, heavy themes doesn't make it any less of a kids movie. That would be like arguing that Sonic the Hedgehog isn't a platformer because some of the game contains puzzle elements.
There's a bunch of things in here that definitely aren't kid-friendly, like the aforementioned drinking and smoking that isn't hidden in innuendo that both the good guys and the bad guys partake in, murders and deaths surround this whole story, jokes far more geared towards adults, guns, swearing. Hell, I'd even say that the Wild West is no place for kids, period, and that one of my favorite Nickelodeon cartoons of all time consistently portrays it as such.
Okay, a kids movie can contain all of those elements and still be a kids movie.
Puss in Boots is an animated kids movie that takes place in the European equivalent of the Wild West and contains its fair share of violence and adult jokes. Many classic Disney movies, most famously Pinocchio and Dumbo, contain overt references to alcohol, and those are both regarded as some of the greatest and relatively appropriate children's movies of all time. The entire narratives of kids' films like The Lion King and Up center squarely on characters overcoming the trauma they receive from the murder or passing away of their loved ones, which is a pretty fucking adult thing to deal with. For fuck's sake, your own example, El Tigre, The Adventures of Manny Rivera, was a cartoon aimed at children that was produced by and aired on Nickelodeon, a children's cable network.
Just because a kids movie can contain things that only adults can enjoy doesn't mean that it stops becoming a kids movie. And quite frankly, I find it very strange that you consider that label a shameful one. Is there something wrong with kids films, or that people think of Rango as one? I would think that people seeing Rango as a kids film would be a good thing because it would make them further appreciate how much the producers were able to get away with despite the restrictions imposed on them by their choice of audience. It would also help them expand their horizons in regards to what kids films should be able to accomplish, thus making it easier for more complex and heavy kids films to be made.
Hell, the film wasn't a huge success, but it still made back its budget, proving that there is a market for kids films that are darker and more thematically complex, which will likely encourage the corporate suits at big entertainment companies to produce more movies like it.
So once again, why are you so butthurt that people like Doug consider Rango to be a kids movie?
It may have a bunch of goofy moments that kids would definitely get a laugh out of, but Rango is made to be more for the adults, and it was made more for the adults in the sense of its maturity.
That doesn't really mean anything when the film literally has a PG rating. It was made for families, therefore it's a kids movie. Is it cool that the film contains elements that can only be enjoyed by adults? Yeah, doesn't mean it's not a kids movie.
All too often, media aimed at adults that deliberately or by chance go the animated route have the idea that being mature and adult is being a dick, getting drunk or stoned off your tits, being mega horny, splashing every frame with blood for the sake of it, and swearing frequently to the point of using fuck as a comma. This even applies to things that I actually like Has Been Hotel when it's good, South Park, and so on. There's more to being an adult than this.
I don't disagree with you, but what does any of that have to do with Rango not being a kids movie?
Adult media that can still be enjoyed by kids is able to talk about so much more, like the meaning of life, ambitions, self-discovery, the painful truth that not everything can be wrapped up nicely with dancing off into the sunset, dealing with death and loss, what it means to be human. Pretty much every event and facet of the human experience you can think of is available to paint with.
Yeah, but just because kids can enjoy some adult media doesn't mean that they should be watching that adult media. For fuck's sake, one of your examples of adult shows that you say kids can enjoy watching is BoJack Horseman, a show that I would argue is far too heavy for kids to be watching. What kind of neglectful-ass parent allows their child to watch a cartoon that has attempted statutory rape in it? Putting that aside, I once again have to ask how any of this makes Rango an adult film.
Rango feels more in line with Ratatouille, The Incredibles, Soul, the first 10 minutes of Up, The Iron Giant. Phenomenal works of art that speak more to adults but are still enjoyable for kids.
Maybe because they're kids' films, moron! But you know what? Let's play dumb here for a second. Who are you to say that there aren't kids out there that can grasp the deeper meanings of films like Ratatouille and The Iron Giant, or that there aren't adults out there who prefer the goofier elements of The Incredibles and Soul? In that case, which elements appeal to what demographic would be completely switched on its head, and therefore none of this classification would make any sense.
There have literally been essays about how animation is the perfect medium to do anything and everything, no matter who it's aimed at.
For the last time, how does any of this prove that Rango isn't a kids' film?
Rango is able to get away with as much adult stuff as it has because it's written more adult than its industry cohorts.
That doesn't mean it still isn't a kids' film.
Sure, you could rework it into a live-action film with humans instead of animals, but you'd lose part of its artistic identity, and when the more cartoonier shenanigans pop up, they just wouldn't be done justice.
and if Doug had actually said that this movie would have been better if it was filmed with real humans instead of being animated, that point might have actually meant something.
And every time Doug calls this a kid's movie, I'm only left wondering if it's strictly because it's animated and came out of Nickelodeon of all places.
Being animated doesn't necessarily mean that something is a kid's movie, but being produced by Nickelodeon damn well is a pretty big indicator that it is. It's a children's media company, for fuck's sake. And even if Doug does think that all animated films are kids' films, what is the problem with that? It's not like he's ever advocated for kids' films to be dumbed down and stripped of any and all mature themes, so who cares if that's what he thinks of animated movies?
It's a kick in the teeth to this movie and the medium as a whole, and it only starts cementing the theory that Doug Walker does not respect animation as an art form that can do anything. He may have given praise to things like Tom and Jerry, South Park, and Secret of NIMH, but if this is how he's going to go about something that uses the medium for mature, artistic Western, then this review is an even bigger slap in the face to those.
That's the stupidest thing I ever heard!
You made that point with literally nothing to back it up. Most of this video has been you ignoring the points that Doug actually made about the movie he's reviewing, so you can flex how much of a fucking nerd you are. So I don't appreciate you making all of these assumptions about his thoughts on animation without a lick of evidence.
Every time Doug calls this a kid's movie, it further reinforces the animation age ghetto. A trope I am sick of, that pigeonholes the medium as something only kids can enjoy, and the second it decides to make something for adults that treats them as thinking adults with themes and materials that children absolutely cannot handle, it gets attacked by the Karens of the world that expect the television and iPad to raise their hellspawn instead of being an actual fucking parent.
First of all, Doug never said that all animation should be made exclusively for children and must therefore never delve into darker or more mature subject matter. So I don't know where the fuck all of this is coming from. Second of all, aren't you the one who said that kids can enjoy BoJack Horseman?
Adult media that can still be enjoyed by kids is able to talk about so much more, like the meaning of life, ambitions, self-discovery, the painful truth that not everything can be wrapped up nicely with dancing off into the sunset.
Yeah, I don't think you have the right to criticize the parental negligence of others.
I know trying to get Doug to understand or think critically about stories that have a more metaphorical approach or use more symbolism and allegory is a lost cause at this point.
This coming from the woman who couldn't actually address a good chunk of the criticisms that Doug had of the movie.
Now that is irony!
That said, when you're the face of internet film criticism for better or for worse, and you can't digest anything more complex than a Roadrunner cartoon, why should anyone take your more worldly take seriously?
For the millionth time, you have no way of proving that any of that is accurate to how Doug actually thinks, and the exact same thing could be said about you.
The saying, a broken clock is right twice a day, would be applicable to Doug if he didn't keep going back on his words and shooting any credibility he had and fair points he makes in the head and deflecting legitimate criticism that comes his way.
I was about to just say I refer you to my last comment, but what's this mess about Doug deflecting any criticism that comes his way? When the hell did that ever happen? Say what you will about how Channel Awesome handled all of the controversy surrounding its management, but when it comes to Doug himself, he's been a pretty good sport about all of the shit that people have been giving him. So what the fuck are you on about?
And that was Nostalgia Critic's review of Rango. Butter, tastin', biscuits, and sausage gravy, this was a massive disservice to the movie.
Not really. It was just a decentish review of the film that summarized its plot and poked fun at some of its odd moments.
I don't know what he was expecting from it back when it came out, and I don't know what he was expecting upon revisiting it, but one thing's for sure, he definitely hasn't advanced his level of thinking beyond pointing out the tropes.
Meanwhile... So the film opens up pretty awesome. Honestly, most of the first third is pretty great. We see a mariachi band standing in front of the title, establishing while this might be different, at its heart it is going to be a Western. Awesome, I'm all in. Again, I'm probably being too harsh on this very average main character. I mean, these kind of leads are a dime a dozen. But look at this thing. Honestly, look at most of the designs in this. The more weird they look, the more memorable you think the personalities are gonna be. And him? He looks like a dead Kermit the Frog shoved awkwardly into a shoebox. I want him to have a more interesting personality than Flick's theatrical brother. He's still alive and says he's looking for the spirit of the West, for he will show him enlightenment.
They say he rides an alabaster carriage with golden guardians to protect him.
He wants to cross the road to discover him, as I think the idea is you need to be near death in order to see the spirit of the West and to be enlightened. It's a little vague, and I like that. It gets even stranger as Not Yet Rango starts to hallucinate, gets tossed around from car to car, and one of them is driven by the last character you'd ever expect to cameo in a family film.
I knew it.
God, I wish this is what the rest of the movie was. I should also point out the animation in this is pretty spectacular, especially considering it was done over 10 years ago. This is the same year that brought us Green Lantern, Hoodwink 2, and Mars Needs Moms. This CG is pretty damn impressive. A lot of that I think is the textures and lighting, as the celebrity live action references, or emotion capture as they call it, doesn't appear to add that much. At least with Polar Express, the idea was to make these people look and move more realistically. To varying results, but that was the idea. Again though, these aren't people, they're animals, and they're designed so odd, I don't think they need them to move that real. But I will admit, it doesn't take away anything either. Needless to say, a lot of this imagery is so surreal and otherworldly that it really does thrive when it just gives into the weirdness. She takes him to the town of dirt, which at times can be creative, but other times is surprisingly underwhelming. What's fun about scenarios with little creatures is how they utilize their surroundings. I always love it in Rescuers or Arrietty, all the various ways they use common objects as something else. Occasionally we get that, like cactus juice is literally a cactus and a Pepto-Bismol bottle is an outhouse. But most of it is just stuff in the human world except smaller. Like, who the hell is making small guns that actually shoot small bullets? Okay, not that many. I do give credit that Nickelodeon and Lev Verbinski go so gooey and gross. I guess it makes sense when you realize this is the same company that allowed Ren and Stimpy and Batman vs. the Ninja Turtles. I kind of forget how awesome they can be sometimes. And look, a predictable story is not bad if a lot of new things are done with it. But like I said, the coolest stuff was in the first third. Now it's just this run-of-the-mill story with no surprises. Except maybe the stuff that never comes back into play. For example, what's this about?
Have you met Angelique?
Hello, Beans.
Hello, Angelique.
Tart.
Floozy.
Shredder.
That never comes back again, dames! When the people are given water, they do this weird dance. Even Rango asks about it and doesn't really get an answer.
So, is this considered normal civic behavior?
Mm-hmm. Every Wednesday.
Oh, well that makes the bit work. Why are you dancing? Yes. Sometimes something will happen that's pretty funny. Like when these obvious robbers are going to steal the water and the brainless Rango accidentally tells them how to do it.
The bank's being robbed! The bank's being robbed!
There's also a funny scene where they ride off to find the robbers to epic music.
Where are we going?
That's hilarious. Like I said, scenes like this do give a bit of charm, but there aren't that many in between the stale plot and forgettable side characters. And there are a lot of side characters to forget. I don't remember any of these folks' names or personalities outside of this one with an arrow in his eye. I think the reason being there's an arrow in his eye. Even this child played by Abigail Breslin.
You're funny looking.
You're funny looking too.
That's a funny looking shirt.
Funny looking dress.
You got funny looking eyes.
You got a funny looking face.
Strangers don't last long here.
She has a great look and sometimes a deadpan sense of humor, but at the end of the day, she's just the hopeful kid looking for a hero, nothing else.
You're gonna bring that water back, aren't you?
Count on it, little sister.
If this movie wanted new twists on this idea, they'd have her be the villain. That's the unconventional, weird-ass movie I love to see. Best get to what the kids really want. Conversations about capitalist expansion. Yeah, is this where you thought we'd be an hour after watching that? Even if you're a little kid seeing this cliche for the first time, why would this be entertaining to you? Lex Luthor was at least fun to listen to when he discussed his complicated plan. This Otisburg spin-off isn't nearly as entertaining. Suspecting Rango is getting too close, he calls Rattlesnake Jake, played by Bill Nighy. This is another character that's written dull as a rock, but I'll give him this. He looks and sounds pretty intimidating.
But we know better, don't we?
Man, it's like every scale has a base in it.
Listen close, you pathetic fraud. This is my town.
Good thing Bill Nye was there as a reference too. He moves exactly like a snake. See, wait, this was kind of dumb. I will say the redemption arc is a little creative. He encounters the Spirit of the West, again, possibly on the verge of death. And it turns out to be Clint Eastwood. The Golden Guardians are his awards, and even though they couldn't get the actual Eastwood to voice him, Timothy Olyphant does a pretty good impersonation.
You came a long way to find something that isn't out here. It's not about you. It's about them.
I also like that the idea is he has to check his ego, like it's not about him, it's about these other people he should help. That's what gives him his identity. Not necessarily what he thinks, but what he does. Had Rango been a more funny or interesting character in a less standard and convoluted story, this would have been a lot more powerful to me. But I will admit, it is still pretty cool. I also like we're never given an explanation of what he was. A hallucination, the actual Spirit of the West, who knows? Even the armadillo is there, blurring who's still alive and who's dead. It gets weirder when these trees that look like Ents fuck Sneed start moving towards where the water is going, which is a giant city. Again, no explanation why these trees can walk or if it's a hallucination, it just sorta happens. And goddammit, I wish there was more of it. I want this movie to explain less, to think outside the box, to be that film you couldn't easily explain. But whenever it gets close, it returns back to its safe space of getting everybody to love him again. I love that something so weird and odd looking that also has drops of existentialism in it can get a wide release for a kid's audience.
I'm not even going to entertain his bum reviews video on it because it would be redundant.
It would also be really fucking stupid, since the bum reviews are joke videos.
The fact he doesn't get it and keeps writing it off as a kid's movie would be one thing.
You have no proof that Doug didn't get what this movie was trying to tell him, nor that he simply wrote it off on the basis that it was a kid's movie.
But factor in accusations of the movie holding his hand when it isn't.
A claim that you never actually refuted.
Baiting Twitter to cancel this movie over things that are largely harmless, if a bit awkward because of hindsight.
Something Doug never actually did, and plus, you even admitted that some of these scenes would be ripe for jokes about cancel culture because of how easily offended they would make people if they were taken out of context, which was the joke that Doug was making. You bought yourself a double whammy in 5 seconds. That's impressive.
And how the liar revealed trope in the story is done so well, Doug is refusing to get on the therapy couch and actively engage with it.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
And that nightmare-fueled thumbnail image becomes a warning sign of what you're in for.
A relatively harmless review of an obscure Nickelodeon movie?
As for Doug, really the only thing I can sign off on is that the perfect adult, quote-unquote, Western for his taste is A Million Ways to Die in the West. Enjoy the tobacco juice, old boots, musty Family Guy, soured Thanksgiving leftover taste of Seth MacFarlane's abortion of a film career.
Come on. Come on, baby. I just want out.
Thank you all for watching, and have a good day. Except Doug. I hope you find a diamond back in your boots.
I find it funny how the woman who got mad at Doug for supposedly joking about canceling Rango because it could lead to people trying to cancel the movie in real life has no problem jokingly hoping that he gets himself killed, despite how that could lead to people actually trying to get Doug killed. It really drives home how big of a hypocrite you are. On that note, this video is finally done, which means that it's time for me to segue into my final thoughts.
Good lord, you guys. It's been a while since I've seen a video that failed this hard at responding to the points another person was making. Again, I'm no longer the biggest fan of the Nostalgia Critic web series, and I don't even agree with everything Doug said in his review of Rango, but Magma Paint had me thinking that she watched a different video from me with how often she strawmanned the criticisms that Doug had for the film. Even the few valid criticisms of the video she did offer weren't enough to completely debunk Doug's overall thoughts on the movie, which Magma made very clear she was trying to do with her response. Pair that with her attempts to paint Doug as the Antichrist without offering any compelling evidence that he was actually guilty of any of the things she was accusing him of, and you've got a pretty bad response video. The worst part of all of this, however, is that I really don't disagree with a lot of the things Magma said. For example, she and I have a near identical stance in regards to Me Too turning from a well-meaning investigation into the crooked underbelly of Hollywood's elites to a witch hunt designed to go after any famous man that the masses of America decided to hate that week. I also agree with her that the general public has a narrow-minded view of the medium of animation, which has driven much of its innovators to become creatively stagnant. The problem is, none of that had anything to do with what Doug actually said in his review of Rango. So as much as I don't want to put down someone that I probably agree with on a lot of things, I prefer to put my integrity over conformity. And if that means calling a bad response video a bad response video, then I'll be the first to say, Magma, you made a pretty fucking bad response video.
I'm Alex the Critic, and I'll see you guys next time.